Hello and welcome back to the Crime Folio. Tonight, we step away from the forensics of violence and into the rarefied world of high-stakes theft. There is a unique allure to the art heist. It isn't merely about monetary gain. It's about possessing the priceless, stealing a piece of history, a sliver of human genius. These are crimes of intellect, audacity, and nerve, where the perpetrators become ghosts in the grand cathedrals of culture. We will explore the most daring thefts ever conceived, beginning with a crime that left a permanent, ghostly wound in the heart of Boston. Case 1. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum Heist. To understand the wound, you must first understand the heart. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum is not like other museums. It is not a sterile white box designed for the dispassionate viewing of artifacts. It is a living, breathing testament to one woman's singular vision, a work of art in itself that happens to contain other works of art. Isabella Stewart Gardner, an eccentric and brilliant Boston socialite, traveler, and collector, built her museum in the city's Fenway neighborhood at the turn of the 20th century. She designed it to evoke a 15th-century Venetian palace, complete with a breathtaking, glass-roofed interior courtyard that blooms with life year-round. Fenway Court, as she called it, was her world. She meticulously arranged every painting, every sculpture, every piece of furniture and textile, creating intimate, layered galleries that were meant to be experienced as a whole, a personal and immersive aesthetic journey. She was not just a collector, she was a curator of emotion, and so profound was her connection to this creation that her last will and testament was an act of preservation as much as it was a legal document. She bequeathed her museum to the city of Boston for the education and enjoyment of the public forever, but with a strict, unalterable condition. Nothing in the galleries was to be permanently changed. Not a single painting moved, not a tapestry taken down, not a piece of furniture sold. If her arrangement was altered, the will stipulated that the entire collection, worth billions, was to be auctioned off in Paris, and the museum dissolved into nothingness. For nearly a century, her vision was honored. The palace remained as she left it, a perfect, preserved amber of a bygone era, until one cold March night, when two men came to break the spell. The date was March 18, 1990. The city of Boston was still reeling from the raucous celebrations of St. Patrick's Day. The streets were cold and quiet, the partygoers having retreated into the warmth of their homes. Inside the Gardner Museum, the halls were dark and silent, watched over by two young security guards. The primary guard on duty that night was 23-year-old Rick Abath. Abath was a musician in a local rock band, a self-described hippie who had taken the museum job for its quiet solitude, a place where he could think and write music during the long, uneventful overnight hours. He was not a security professional. The second guard, 25-year-old Randy Heston, was on his first-ever overnight shift at the museum, having been called in to cover for a colleague. The museum's security system was notoriously outdated, relying more on the presence of the guards than on sophisticated technology. This was the vulnerable, sleeping heart into which a blade was about to be plunged. At 1:24 a.m., a buzzer sounded at the security desk. It was the door to the Palace Road entrance. Abath looked at the monitor and saw two men standing outside. They were dressed in what appeared to be police uniforms, complete with hats and jackets. They looked official. One of them spoke through the intercom. "Boston Police," he said. "We got a report of a disturbance on the grounds." This was the first critical moment, the first domino in a chain of catastrophic failures. Museum protocol was absolute. No one, under any circumstances, was to be admitted after hours. Not even the police. The guards were instructed to call the director or head of security if such a situation arose. But it was late. The men looked legitimate, and there had been St. Patrick's Day revelers in the area. A report of a disturbance seemed plausible. Rick Abath, a 23-year-old musician, not a hardened security expert, made a fateful decision. He broke protocol. He buzzed them in. The two men walked into the reception area. Abath stepped away from the security desk to meet them. This was the second critical mistake. By leaving the desk, he moved away from the only panic button in the entire museum. One of the officers, a man with a fake mustache, approached him. "You look familiar," the man said. "I think we have a warrant for your arrest. Can I see some ID?" It was a clever, disarming tactic. Confused, Abath turned back toward the desk. In that moment, the illusion of authority dissolved into the cold reality of a crime. The two men moved swiftly. They pushed Abath against the wall, forcing his hands behind his back. "Don't give us any problems, and you won't get hurt," one of them said. They handcuffed him. They asked him if anyone else was in the museum. Abath, terrified, told them about the other guard making his rounds. They radioed the second guard, Heston, telling him to come to the security desk. When he arrived, he too was quickly subdued and handcuffed. With both guards neutralized, the taller of the two thieves looked at them and delivered a line that would become infamous, a statement of chilling, almost theatrical finality. "Gentlemen," he said, "this is a robbery." The thieves wrapped duct tape around the guards' heads, covering their eyes and mouths. They then led the two blindfolded men down into the dark, labyrinthine basement of the museum. They handcuffed Abath to a steam pipe and Heston to a workbench, far apart from each other. They checked their wallets, looked at their IDs, and told them their names and addresses. It was a clear, unspoken threat. "We know who you are. We know where you live. Do not interfere." The guards were left in the cold darkness, able to hear only the muffled sounds of footsteps from the galleries above them. For the next 81 minutes, the two thieves had Isabella Stewart Gardner's palace, and all the treasures within it, entirely to themselves. They moved with a strange, unnerving combination of purpose and bewilderment. Their first and primary target was the Dutch room on the second floor, a gallery that held some of the museum's most priceless works. They went straight for Rembrandt's masterpiece, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. Painted in 1633, it was Rembrandt's only known seascape, a dramatic, roiling canvas depicting the biblical story of Jesus calming the storm. The painting's value was, and is, incalculable. It is a cornerstone of Western art. The thieves did not bother with delicate tools. They used a box cutter, crudely slicing the massive canvas from its wooden stretcher, the sound of tearing fabric echoing in the silent gallery. The ragged edges of the canvas left behind were a testament to the brutality of the act. They were not finished. They turned to another Rembrandt, A Lady and Gentleman in Black. Again, they sliced the canvas from its frame. They then attempted to remove a third, much smaller painting, a tiny, postage stamp-sized self-portrait etching of Rembrandt from 1633. This one was in a small frame under glass. In their haste, they failed to remove it properly. Frustrated, they smashed the glass and took the etching, leaving the shattered frame on a chair. Next, they took the concert, one of only 34 known paintings by the Dutch master Johannes Vermeer. A serene, beautiful work depicting three musicians, it is considered by many to be the most valuable unrecovered stolen object in the world, with a modern estimated value of over $250 million. Beside it hung Landscape with an Obelisk by Govert Flink, a student of Rembrandt. For decades, it had been misattributed to Rembrandt himself. The thieves took that as well. Their work in the Dutch room concluded with one of the most baffling choices of the entire heist. Hanging on a wall was a framed letter from Isabella Stewart Gardner. On a table below it sat an ancient Chinese bronze beaker, a ritual vessel known as a gu from the Shang dynasty, dating back to 1200 BC. It was valuable, certainly, but its worth paled in comparison to the masterpieces they had already taken. For reasons that remain a complete mystery, they took the gu. Their journey through the museum continued, their choices becoming even more eclectic and strange. They moved to the short gallery, a long, narrow room on the same floor. There, they ignored priceless Italian paintings and instead focused on 5 small, preparatory sketches of horses and jockeys by the French impressionist Edgar Degas. They were minor works, almost footnotes in the artist's vast portfolio. Then they did something truly bizarre. They went to a corner of the room where a silk flag of Napoleon's Imperial Guard was displayed in a glass case. They unscrewed the case, but they didn't take the priceless flag. Instead, they removed only the ornamental bronze eagle finial that sat atop the flagpole. It was heavy, awkward, and not exceptionally valuable. The choice was, and remains, inexplicable. Finally, they descended to the first floor, to the Blue Room. Here, they took their final prize, Edouard Manet's Chez Tortoni, a small, intimate painting of a gentleman sitting at a café table. It was one of the first works of modern art Gardner ever purchased. It was a personal favorite, a painting that heralded a new way of seeing the world. And then it was over. At 2:45 a.m., after 81 minutes of plunder, the 2 men made 2 separate trips to their car, a red hatchback, loading it with their haul, 13 pieces in total. They returned to the security desk, where they smashed the video cassettes from the security cameras and took the printout from the motion detection system, which would have documented their every move. They paid one last visit to the guards in the basement. "You'll be hearing from us in about a year," one of them said. Then they were gone, vanishing back into the Boston night as easily as they had appeared. For another 5 hours, the guards remained handcuffed in the dark, a slow, terrifying silence descending upon the violated palace. It wasn't until the morning shift arrived at 8:15 a.m. and found the museum eerily unresponsive that the alarm was finally raised. Police entered the building to find a scene of quiet devastation. In the Dutch room, the empty frames hung on the walls like open wounds, their canvases violently excised. Shards of glass littered the floor, and in the basement, 2 terrified young men were finally freed from their bonds. The scale of the theft was staggering. 13 works of art, with a combined value that day of $200 million, a figure that has since climbed to over $500 million, making it the single largest property theft in world history. The Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately took charge of the case. The list of stolen works was a confounding puzzle. Why take a Vermeer and 2 Rembrandts, but leave behind a Titian in the same room that was even more valuable? Why take a bronze eagle and a Chinese beaker, but ignore priceless jewels and other, more easily transportable objects? The thieves seemed to be both sophisticated and clumsy, knowledgeable and yet strangely amateurish. The investigation, now spanning more than 3 decades, has been a labyrinth of tantalizing leads, colorful underworld characters, and frustrating dead ends. The FBI's primary theory has long centered on the Boston Mafia, specifically a crew run by a mobster named Carmelo Merlino. The thinking was that the art was stolen to be used as a bargaining chip, leverage to get members of the crew out of jail. In the years following the heist, informants claimed to have seen some of the paintings. Merlino himself, before he died in prison, reportedly told inmates he was planning to return the art for the reward money. This thread led investigators to Robert "the Cook" Guarente, another aging mobster from Merlino's crew. In 2010, Guarente's widow, Elmis, told the FBI a stunning story. She claimed that when her husband was dying of cancer, he confessed his involvement. He said he had handled some of the stolen artwork and had given 2 of the paintings to another mob associate, Robert "Bobby the Gentleman" Gentile, an elderly gangster from Connecticut. This was the most promising lead in years. In 2012, the FBI raided Gentile's home. In his basement, hidden under a false floor, they found a secret ditch. It was empty, but they did find a handwritten list of the stolen Gardner paintings, along with their estimated black market values. They also found a copy of a newspaper article about the heist from the day after the robbery. Gentile vehemently denied any involvement, claiming he was set up by Guarente's widow. Despite multiple arrests on unrelated charges and immense pressure from the FBI to cooperate, he has maintained his silence, insisting he knows nothing. He remains a figure of intense suspicion, a man who may hold the key to the entire mystery, but whose secrets may have died with him in 2021. Another strong suspect in the heist itself was a local thief named George Reisfelder. An associate of Merlino's, Reisfelder's physical description matched that of one of the phony cops. He also had a history of similar crimes. However, he died of a drug overdose just a year after the robbery, taking any potential knowledge to his grave. And what of the guard who let them in, Rick Abath? He was, for a time, a primary suspect. His story had inconsistencies. Why did he open the door? Why did he leave the security desk? The motion detector printout, which the thieves took, was found to have a single rogue Riodinga signal showing that Abath had opened and closed one of the side doors shortly before the thieves arrived. A door he claimed was never opened. He passed multiple polygraph tests, and investigators could never find any evidence linking him to the crime. Was he a conspirator, an inside man? Or was he simply, as he has always maintained, a young, naive kid who made a terrible mistake under pressure? The question has shadowed him for his entire life. Today, more than 30 years later, the crime remains unsolved. All of the prime suspects are now dead. The reward for information leading to the art's recovery stands at $10 million, the largest private reward ever offered. And in the galleries of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the empty frames still hang on the walls. It is a haunting, powerful sight. By the terms of Isabella's will, the frames cannot be taken down. They remain as placeholders, ghostly reminders of the masterpieces that were stolen from the world. They are a permanent public scar, a testament to a crime of unmatched audacity. The art did not just disappear. It was erased. No ransom note ever arrived. No black market sale has ever been confirmed. The 13 treasures vanished from the face of the earth, their fate a cold, silent mystery. Their beauty existing now only in memory and photographs. A phantom collection from a perfect, 81-minute crime. Case 2. The theft of the Scream. If the Gardner heist was a silent, ghostly violation, our next case is a study in contrasts. A story of 2 thefts of the same iconic image, executed with dramatically different philosophies of crime. The target was not just a painting, but a global symbol of existential angst, a face of pure, primal horror that has been endlessly reproduced on posters, t-shirts, and coffee mugs. It is Edvard Munch's The Scream, and its fame made it not just a target, but a trophy. This is the story of how a nation's treasure was stolen not once, but twice, first with a whisper, and then with a roar. To speak of The Scream is to speak of 4 different works. Between 1893 and 1910, the troubled Norwegian artist Edvard Munch created 2 painted versions and 2 pastel versions of his iconic composition. The image was born from a searing personal experience Munch described in his diary. A walk at sunset where the sky turned a blood red, and he felt a great, infinite scream pass through nature. The androgynous, skeletal figure, hands clapped to its skull-like face, mouth open in a soundless cry, is not the one screaming. It is trying to block out the shriek of the world around it. It is an image of profound psychological distress, a masterpiece of expressionism that captures the anxiety of the modern age. And in 1994, it was Norway's most cherished cultural artifact. The year was 1994. The eyes of the world were on Norway. The small town of Lillehammer was hosting the Winter Olympics, a moment of immense national pride. The country's police and security forces were stretched thin, their focus squarely on protecting the athletes, dignitaries, and massive crowds gathered for the games. The capital city of Oslo, though not the host city, was caught up in the celebratory atmosphere. It was within this climate of festive distraction that a plan of breathtaking simplicity and arrogance was set in motion. The target was the 1893 version of The Scream, the most famous of the four, housed in the National Gallery of Norway in Oslo. In the pre-dawn hours of February 12th, the very day the Olympic Games were set to open, two men approached the museum. There was no elaborate plan, no inside man, no complex disabling of electronic systems. They simply leaned a wooden ladder against the side of the building, climbed up to a second-story window, and smashed it. An alarm immediately blared through the silent museum, its shrill cry piercing the winter darkness. A single guard heard it, but, accustomed to false alarms caused by temperature fluctuations, he followed a slow, methodical protocol, assuming it was another malfunction. He did not rush to the scene. He did not immediately call the police. That small delay was all the thieves needed. They slipped through the broken window, their feet crunching on the glass. They walked directly to the Scream. It was held to the wall by wires. Using a pair of wire cutters, they snipped it free. Their entire time inside the gallery was less than a minute 50 seconds from entry to exit. They climbed back down the ladder and vanished into the Oslo morning. They were so confident, so contemptuous of the museum's security, that they left a small calling card on the floor where they had shattered the window. It was a postcard. On it, they had written a short, taunting message: "Tak for darlig sikring. Thanks for the poor security." When the museum staff discovered the theft, a wave of shock and profound national embarrassment washed over Norway. On the opening day of their glorious Olympics, they had been humiliated by a crime that was more akin to a teenage prank than a sophisticated art heist. The audacity was galling. The police were stumped. They had no witnesses, no forensic leads. The thieves had been ghosts. For weeks, the case was cold. Then, the motive became clear. In early March, the Norwegian government received a ransom demand for $1 million US. The government, adhering to a strict international policy, refused to pay. To do so would be to legitimize art theft and encourage countless copycat crimes. The standoff began. The thieves had a priceless masterpiece, but they couldn't sell it on the open market. It was far too famous. The government wanted its national treasure back, but it would not be held hostage. The Norwegian police, realizing they were dealing with a level of criminal enterprise beyond their typical experience, made a quiet call for help. The request went to one of the most elite and specialized units in the world, the Art and Antique Squad of London's Scotland Yard. Answering that call was Detective Chief Inspector Charlie Hill, a legendary figure in the world of art recovery. Hill was an unusual detective, a flamboyant, erudite man with a degree in theology. He looked more like a university professor than a hard-nosed cop. But beneath his eccentric exterior was a brilliant and tenacious investigator who understood the unique psychology of the art world and the criminals who inhabited it. Hill, along with an undercover agent from the FBI, devised a classic sting operation. They would pose as representatives of the J. Paul Getty Museum in California, wealthy and slightly shady buyers looking to acquire a masterpiece for their Black Museum, a secret illicit collection. The Norwegian police created a fake company for them, complete with a letterhead and a bank account, to make their cover plausible. Through a series of intermediaries, they made contact with the thieves' representatives. The negotiation was a tense, delicate dance. They met in hotel bars, their conversations a mix of coded language and outright lies. The thieves were paranoid, constantly changing meeting locations and testing the buyers to see if they were legitimate. Hill played his part to perfection, projecting an air of bored, wealthy entitlement. Finally, a deal was struck. They would pay a fraction of the original ransom demand, around £250,000 as a down payment to see the painting. The final meeting was set for May 3, 1994, at a small hotel in the coastal town of Asgardstrand, south of Oslo. The location was steeped in Munch's history. It was where the artist had spent many summers and where he had painted the very view that inspired The Scream. The poetry of recovering the painting in the place of its spiritual birth was not lost on Charlie Hill. When the thieves' go-between arrived and led Hill's undercover colleague to a summer house, the moment of truth arrived. There, hidden in a cellar, wrapped in a dark cloth, was the Scream. It was undamaged. The signal was given. A team of Norwegian special forces, who had been hiding nearby, stormed the location. The sting was a spectacular success. The painting was safe. The investigation then swiftly unraveled the conspiracy, leading to the mastermind, Paul Enger. Enger was not a stranger to Munch's work. In 1988, he had been convicted of stealing another of Munch's masterpieces, The Vampire, for which he served 4 years in prison. He was a career criminal, but one with a specific and peculiar obsession. He claimed a deep connection to Munch, a sense of shared outsider status. His theft of The Scream was part financial, part egotistical, a way to cement his legacy as Norway's most audacious art thief. He and 3 accomplices were tried and convicted. Paul Enger was sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison, a remarkably light sentence for a crime that had shamed a nation. The Scream was returned to the National Gallery, and a new, state-of-the-art security system was installed. The ordeal, it seemed, was over. The painting was safe. For now. A decade passed. The memory of the 1994 heist faded, replaced by the belief that lightning could not possibly strike the same place twice. The lesson had been learned. Security was better. The world had changed. But the allure of The Scream remained, a magnetic pole for criminal ambition. And the next time, the approach would not be one of stealth and wit. It would be one of brute force and terror. The date was August 22, 2004. It was a bright Sunday morning in Oslo. At the Munch Museum, home to the world's largest collection of the artist's work, tourists and art lovers were quietly admiring the collection. Among the works on display were the 1910 painted version of The Scream, and another of Munch's most famous works, Madonna. The museum was open, filled with families and visitors. The security was present, but it was designed for a civilized environment, not for what was about to happen. Shortly after 11 a.m., the peaceful atmosphere was shattered. 2 men, their faces hidden by black ski masks, burst into the museum. One was armed with a .357 Magnum handgun. There was no subtlety, no attempt at stealth. They ran into the main gallery, shouting and brandishing the weapon. Tourists screamed and dove for cover. A female museum guard bravely tried to stop them, but the gunman threatened her. This was not a heist. It was a daylight armed robbery, a violent takeover. The men went straight for their targets. They tore The Scream and Madonna from the wall with such force that pieces of the wooden frames splintered and fell to the floor. An amateur video taken by a terrified tourist shows the men manhandling the priceless, fragile works, holding them like shields as they back out of the gallery. They ran out of the museum, jumped into a black Audi, a 6-station wagon driven by a third accomplice, and sped away, leaving a scene of chaos, terror, and disbelief. The entire operation took only a few minutes, but the message it sent was profoundly different from the 1994 theft. This was not the work of an arrogant art lover. This was the work of violent professional criminals. The immediate aftermath was one of panic, not just for the recovery of the art, but for its survival. Witnesses described the thieves handling the paintings roughly. The frames were broken. Had the canvases themselves been punctured or torn? The police found the getaway car abandoned and burned on the outskirts of Oslo, a classic move by organized crime to destroy forensic evidence. This was a much more serious and dangerous game. The Norwegian police launched one of the largest investigations in their history. The motive was a complete mystery. Unlike the 1994 heist, no ransom demand was ever made. The paintings had simply vanished. As weeks turned into months, a chilling theory began to emerge from the criminal underworld. This was not a robbery for money, nor for the love of art. It was a strategic diversion. The investigation led police to one of Norway's most notorious criminals, David Tosca, the mastermind of a vast criminal network. In April 2004, just 4 months before the museum robbery, Tosca had orchestrated the Nokas robbery, a commando-style raid on a cash depot in the city of Stavanger. That heist had gone horribly wrong, ending in a massive shootout that left a police officer, Arne Sigve Klungland, dead. It was the most violent robbery in Norwegian history, and the police were closing in on Tosca and his gang. The theory was that Tosca, from his hiding place, ordered the theft of the Scream and Madonna to create a massive media distraction and pull police resources away from the Nokas murder investigation. The world's most famous image of psychological anguish was being used as a tactical pawn in a violent criminal conspiracy. In the spring of 2005, a wave of arrests was made, connecting a web of individuals to both the museum heist and the broader Tosca criminal enterprise. But even with suspects in custody, the paintings remained missing. For 2 full years, the art world feared the worst. Rumors circulated that the paintings had been damaged during the heist and subsequently destroyed to eliminate evidence. The cultural loss seemed absolute. The break finally came in the summer of 2006. In a complex deal that remains partially shrouded in secrecy, one of the convicted criminals from the Nokas case reportedly offered information on the painting's location in exchange for a more lenient sentence or better prison conditions. On August 31, 2006, the Oslo police held a press conference to announce the news the world had been waiting for. The paintings had been recovered. They were found in a hidden location outside Oslo. The details of the recovery were kept vague, but the result was what mattered. The relief, however, was tempered by the condition of the art. The paintings had not been kept in a climate-controlled environment. They were scarred by their 2-year ordeal. Madonna had a tear in the canvas and several scratches. The Scream was in worse shape. It had scratches, scuff marks, and a large permanent moisture stain in the lower left-hand corner. The delicate cardboard on which it was painted had absorbed water, leaving a discolored tide mark that conservationists could mitigate but never fully erase. The physical damage was a stark, tangible reminder of the brutality of the crime. This was not a victimless act. A piece of human history had been wounded. After a painstaking restoration process, both paintings were put back on display in 2008, now protected behind thick panes of security glass. The trials of the perpetrators were a complex legal saga, with convictions, appeals, and acquittals. Ultimately, several men, including the mastermind David Tosca, were held responsible and served prison time for their roles in the robbery. The 2 thefts of the Scream tell a story about the evolution of crime itself. The first was a crime of ego, a cat-and-mouse game played for fame and money, executed with a certain detached, almost theatrical flair. The second was a crime of pure, cynical utility, a violent act where priceless art was treated as disposable leverage, a mere tool in a larger, deadlier conflict. Together, they reveal the profound vulnerability of our most celebrated cultural treasures. The very fame that makes a work like The Scream immortal also makes it a target. It is a magnet for those who wish to own a piece of that immortality, and for those who see it as nothing more than a powerful instrument to be used and, if necessary, broken. The scar on the corner of the 1910 painting is a permanent reminder that even a masterpiece depicting a silent scream can be made to suffer. Case 3. The 1911 Mona Lisa heist. From the raw violence of modern armed robbery, we now retreat a century, to an era of gaslight and cobblestones. We move to a crime that was not one of tactical precision or brutal force, but of stunning, almost elegant simplicity. This is the story of a theft that did more than just leave an empty space on a wall. It was a theft that, in a profound and ironic twist of fate, gave birth to a global icon. Before this crime, she was a masterpiece. After, she was a legend. This is the story of the day someone stole the Mona Lisa. In the summer of 1911, the Louvre in Paris was not the gleaming, high-security fortress it is today. It was a grand, sprawling, and somewhat dusty palace of art, a labyrinth of galleries where security was shockingly lax. Doors were often left unlocked, hundreds of rooms were unmonitored, and the small contingent of guards was more concerned with artists setting up easels than with sophisticated criminals. The museum's most prized possession, Leonardo da Vinci's La Gioconda, or Mona Lisa, hung in the Salon Care, a gallery of Renaissance masterpieces. She was famous, certainly, a jewel in the French collection, but she had not yet ascended to the realm of myth. She was one masterpiece among many, admired by connoisseurs but not yet the object of worldwide popular obsession. A quiet, unassuming man who knew the museum's vulnerabilities intimately would change that forever. His name was Vincenzo Peruggia. He was an Italian immigrant, a house painter and handyman who had found work in Paris. He was a small, quiet man with a fierce, almost fanatical sense of national pride. To him, France was a nation that had grown rich on the plundered treasures of his homeland. He looked at the Italian masterpieces in the Louvre and saw not a celebration of art, but a collection of stolen goods. He developed a particular obsession with the Mona Lisa. He believed, as did many Italians at the time, that Napoleon Bonaparte had looted the painting from Italy during his campaigns. He was mistaken. Leonardo da Vinci had brought the painting to France himself in the 16th century when he went to work for King Francis I. But for Peruggia, this historical nuance was irrelevant. In his mind, the Mona Lisa was a captive, and he would be her liberator. His plan was born of intimate knowledge. In 1910, Peruggia had been part of a team hired by the Louvre to construct protective glass cases for some of its most famous works, including the Mona Lisa. He had handled the painting, felt its weight, looked into its enigmatic eyes up close. He knew the routine of the museum, the schedules of the guards, the layout of its endless corridors. He knew that on Mondays, the Louvre was closed to the public for cleaning and maintenance. He knew that the many workers, dressed in their customary white smocks, could move about the museum with relative anonymity. His plan was not one of forcible entry, but of simple invisibility. On Sunday, August 20th, 1911, Vincenzo Peruggia entered the Louvre as a regular visitor. As the museum prepared to close for the evening, he slipped away from the crowds and found a small, unused storeroom, a dusty closet on the second floor. There he hid, waiting as the last visitors departed. The lights were dimmed, and the great museum fell silent. He spent the night in the darkness, a ghost in the machine. The next morning, Monday, August 21st, Peruggia emerged from his hiding place. He put on a white worker's smock he had brought with him, instantly becoming one of the many maintenance men wandering the halls. He was no longer an intruder. He was part of the scenery. He walked calmly and deliberately to the salon care. It was empty. He approached the Mona Lisa. He lifted the heavy, 154-pound wooden panel and its frame off the 4 iron pegs that held it to the wall and carried it to a nearby service staircase, the Escalier Miru. Here, in the secluded stairwell, he set about removing the painting from its heavy, ornate frame and protective glass case. This was the most difficult part of the operation. The frame was bulky and secure. As he struggled with it, a plumber named Sauvet happened to walk down the stairs. Seeing a fellow worker struggling, Sauvet asked Perugia if he needed help. Perugia calmly explained that the doorknob was missing, and he was stuck. The plumber, without a second thought, used his own pliers to open the door for him. It was a moment of supreme, unwitting irony. A museum employee helping the thief escape. Once alone, Perugia successfully removed the poplar wood panel from its casing. The frame and glass he left behind in the stairwell. He then tucked the paintinga relatively small 21 by 30 inches under his white smock and walked towards the exit. He headed for the Quai du Louvre entrance, but found it locked. For a moment it seemed his simple plan had failed. But his luck held. A museum guard, a man who recognized Perugia from his previous work at the museum, arrived to open the door for a worker. Seeing Perugia, he smiled, unlocked the door, and let him out. Vincenzo Perugia walked out into the Paris morning, carrying a masterpiece under his arm, and simply disappeared. For more than a day, no one knew she was gone. The absence of a painting in the Louvre was not, at first, cause for alarm. It was common for works to be removed to be photographed in the museum studio or taken for cleaning. On Tuesday morning, a painter named Louis Baraud, who had come to the Salon Care to paint a sketch of the Mona Lisa in her gallery setting, found only 4 iron pegs on the wall. He inquired with the guards. They assumed the painting was at the photography department. They checked. It was not. A slow, creeping sense of confusion turned to dawning horror. A frantic search of the entire vast museum was launched. By Tuesday afternoon, the unthinkable was confirmed. The Mona Lisa had been stolen. The news hit France like a physical blow. It was a national humiliation. How could the country's most famous artistic treasure simply vanish from its most prestigious museum? The headlines screamed. The police, the Charité, were clueless. They found the abandoned frame and glass case on the staircase. They found a single thumbprint on the Framea thumbprint that belonged to Vincenzo Perugia. But their records were poorly organized. They had his print on file from a previous minor arrest, but because they only searched by the right hand, and the print was from his left, they failed to make a match. The investigation became a media circus. The Louvre was closed for a week. A reward was offered. Theories flew. Was it the work of a sophisticated art theft ring? Was it an act of cultural terrorism by a rival nation? The police, desperate for a lead, began to look at the Parisian avant-garde, a community known for its anti-establishment views. They questioned the poet Guillaume Apollinaire, who had once called for the Louvre to be burnt down. Under pressure, Apollinaire implicated his friend, a young and controversial Spanish painter who was making a name for himself in Paris, Pablo Picasso. Picasso was brought in for questioning, terrified that he would be framed for a crime he had nothing to do with. Both men were eventually cleared, but the incident highlighted the sheer desperation and cluelessness of the official investigation. Meanwhile, a strange cultural phenomenon was taking place. The Mona Lisa, in her absence, became more famous than she had ever been in her presence. People flocked to the Louvre not to see art, but to see the empty space on the wall where she used to hang. They stared at the 4 iron pegs with a morbid fascination. Postcards of the painting sold out across Paris. The theft had elevated her from a work of art to a cause célèbre, a missing person whose face was suddenly everywhere. The void she left behind was a canvas onto which the public projected its own shock and intrigue. And where was the real Mona Lisa? She was in a small, cheap apartment on the Rue de l'Hôpital St. Louis, not far from the Louvre. Vincenzo Peruggia had taken her home. For 2 years he lived with her. He kept her hidden in a false bottom he built into a wooden trunk, taking her out on occasion to gaze at her. It was a bizarre, intimate cohabitation. The humble Italian worker and the world's most famous captive, living together in secret while the world searched for her. He was a terrible custodian. The painting was kept near a hot stove, causing the poplar panel to warp slightly, a faint crack appearing near the top of her head that is still visible today. He was not a criminal mastermind planning a ransom. He was a man with a stolen treasure he had no idea what to do with. He had achieved his patriotic goal, but the final step returning her to Italy proved more complicated than the theft itself. 2 years passed. The trail went cold. The world began to accept that the Mona Lisa might be lost forever. But in November 1913, Peruggia decided it was time to act. He wrote a letter to an art dealer in Florence, Italy, named Alfredo Geri. Using the alias Leonardo, he offered to sell Geri the stolen Mona Lisa, stating that it was his wish to see the painting returned to its rightful home in Italy, for a modest expense fee of 500,000 lire. Geri, though deeply skeptical, was intrigued. He contacted Giovanni Paggi, the director of the renowned Uffizi Gallery, and together, they arranged to meet this mysterious Leonardo. In December 1913, Peruggia traveled from Paris to Florence by train, with the Mona Lisa still hidden in his trunk. He checked into a hotel, which he later renamed the Hotel La Gioconda in his honor, and met with Geri and Paggi. He revealed his true identity and, back in his hotel room, he opened the trunk. He unwrapped the painting from a piece of red silk and presented it to them. Geri and Paggi were art experts of the highest order. They immediately recognized the signature craquelureth fine pattern of cracking on the paint's surface and the official Louvre collection number on the back of the panel. There was no doubt. This was her. Maintaining their composure, they told Peruggia they needed to take the painting to the Uffizi to authenticate it against their records. Peruggia, naive and trusting, agreed. He let them walk out of his hotel room with the masterpiece. Once safely at the Uffizi, Geri and Paggi immediately called the police. Vincenzo Peruggia was arrested later that day, sitting in his hotel room, waiting for his payment. The 2-year odyssey was over. The news of her recovery caused an international sensation. Before returning her to France, Italy celebrated. The Mona Lisa was put on a triumphant tour, exhibited at the Uffizi in Florence, the Palazzo Farnese in Rome, and the Brera Gallery in Milan. Tens of thousands of Italians lined up for hours to welcome their long-lost La Gioconda home, even if only for a short visit. Vincenzo Peruggia, meanwhile, became a national folk hero. His crime was seen not as theft, but as an act of passionate, if misguided, patriotism. At his trial, the court was lenient. He was celebrated for his patriotic spirit, and he was sentenced to just over a year in prison, of which he served only 7 months. When the Mona Lisa finally returned to the Louvre at the beginning of 1914, she returned to a world that had been transformed. The security was now intense. But more importantly, she herself was transformed. She was no longer just a painting. She was a survivor, a celebrity, a global phenomenon. The 2 years she spent in a trunk in a humble Paris apartment cemented her place in the public imagination in a way that 4 centuries hanging on a palace wall never could. The theft of the Mona Lisa was a crime against art, but it was also the act that created her myth, a myth so powerful that she is now arguably the most famous single object on the entire planet. Her enigmatic smile is famous not just for what it is, but for the fact that, for 2 long years, it was gone. Case 4. The Antwerp Diamond Heist. The heist of the century. Our final story is not about art in the traditional sense, not about paint on canvas or a figure carved from marble. It is about an art of a different kind. The art of the earth, condensed by pressure and time into prisms of pure light. It is about diamonds. And this is the story of a crime so audacious, so complex, and so perfectly executed that it transcended mere theft and became a legend in the annals of criminal enterprise. We move now to the heart of the world's diamond trade, to a vault believed to be utterly impregnable, and to a man who saw its security not as a barrier, but as a puzzle waiting to be solved. The city of Antwerp, Belgium, is to diamonds what Paris is to art. For centuries, its bustling diamond district, a small, heavily guarded neighborhood of a few square blocks, has been the global epicenter of the diamond trade. Billions of dollars in rough and polished stones pass through its workshops and exchanges every year. It is a world built on a delicate paradox of trust and extreme paranoia. Deals worth fortunes are sealed with a handshake, but the physical security is among the tightest on earth. At the heart of this fortress-like district stood the Antwerp Diamond Center, a building that housed the vaults of dozens of diamond merchants. And deep in its sub-basement, 2 floors below ground, lay the main vault's strong room so legendarily secure that it was considered the gold standard, a place where a diamond's safety was absolute. The vault was not protected by a single system, but by a formidable layered defense designed to defeat any conceivable threat. The door alone was a 3-ton slab of steel, secured by a custom-made dual-lock system. It required both a foot-long, non-reproducible key and a combination lock with over 100 million possible permutations. But the door was only the beginning. The vault was a sensor-laden trap. A magnetic field protected the door. If it was opened without the proper disarming sequence, an alarm would instantly trigger. A seismic sensor was embedded in the floor, designed to detect the slightest vibration from drilling or explosions. An infrared heat and motion detector swept the chamber, ready to sense the body heat or movement of any intruder. Finally, a light sensor would trigger an alarm if the vault's interior was ever illuminated when it was supposed to be dark. To top it all off, the building had its own private security force, and the district was blanketed with surveillance cameras. The Antwerp Diamond Center Vault was not just a safe. It was a technological masterpiece of paranoia. To breach it was considered impossible. But one man saw the impossible as an invitation. His name was Leonardo Notarbartolo. An Italian from Turin, Notarbartolo was no common thug. He was a master thief, a charismatic and intelligent criminal who saw his work as a form of artistry. He had spent his life studying security systems, locks, and alarms. He was a student of vulnerabilities. And for him, the Antwerp Diamond Center Vault was his Mona Lisa, his ultimate, career-defining challenge. His plan was not one of brute force, but of immense patience, meticulous observation, and a deep understanding of the human element that is always the weakest link in any security chain. His infiltration began 3 years before the heist in 2000. He executed a long con of exceptional commitment. He rented a small office within the Diamond Center itself, posing as a freelance Italian diamond merchant. He paid his rent on time, conducted small, legitimate business deals, and made himself a familiar, unremarkable face in the district. He dressed well, was charming and affable, and slowly built a reputation as a trustworthy, if minor, player. He was hiding in plain sight, an apex predator masquerading as harmless prey. This identity gave him what no amount of force could access. He was inside the fortress, For 2.5 years, he conducted a painstaking slow-motion reconnaissance. His primary tool was a small camera hidden inside a ballpoint pen. During his visits to the vault to access his own safe deposit box, which he had rented as part of his cover, would subtly film everything. He captured images of the vault door, the keypad, the ceiling where the sensors were housed. He filmed the guards, their routines, their moments of inattention. He noted the location of the electrical wiring for the alarm system. And he made the single most crucial observation of the entire operation. The head of vault security, a man obsessed with convenience, did not keep the foot-long vault key in a secure location. He kept it hidden in a small closet in a utility room just outside the vault itself. The key to the kingdom was hanging on a hook. With his intelligence gathered, Notarbartolo began to assemble his team. He was the mastermind, the artist. But he could not do it alone. He recruited a small, specialized crew, men he later referred to only by their nicknames, adding to their mystique. There was the King of Keys, a shadowy figure considered one of the world's finest lockpickers and key duplicators. There was the Genius, an expert in electronics and alarm systems. And there was the Monster, a muscular giant, a master of mechanics and heavy lifting. Together, they formed a crew of ghosts, each a master of his specific dark art. They called themselves the School of Turin. They spent months in a replica of the vault they built in a warehouse, practicing every step of the plan until it was second nature. The genius devised solutions for each of the vault sensors. To defeat the magnetic field on the door, he constructed a custom-made aluminum shield that could be fixed over the magnetic contacts, effectively isolating them and allowing the door to be opened without triggering the alarm. To defeat the infrared heat and motion detector, they relied on a simple, low-tech, but brilliant solution: a thick coating of women's hairspray sprayed onto the sensor's lens, temporarily blinding it. To defeat the light sensor, a small piece of black electrical tape would suffice. The King of Keys, using Notarbartolo's pen camera footage, created a perfect duplicate of the vault key. The final piece of the puzzle was the combination lock. Here, the story enters the realm of myth and controversy. According to Notarbartolo, during one of his reconnaissance missions, he noticed that the vault's door was sometimes left slightly ajar for ventilation. He claimed that he got a lucky look at the combination dial and, more astoundingly, saw the correct combination written on a small piece of paper taped to the wall right above it. It seemed too good to be true, a level of carelessness that bordered on the absurd. Investigators would later theorize that Notarbartolo's team had found a way to figure it out, or that he had an unidentified inside man. But Notarbartolo has always stuck to his story. The secret was simply handed to him. The heist was set for the weekend of February 15th to 16th, 2003, a holiday weekend in Antwerp. The Diamond Center would be quiet, almost deserted. Notarbartolo provided himself with the perfect alibi. He drove to the district on Friday, made a few small transactions to show he was there, and then ostensibly left town. His team, meanwhile, slipped into the building. Under the cover of darkness, they began their work. They moved with silent, practiced precision. They used the aluminum shield to neutralize the magnetic field. They gained access to the utility room and retrieved the duplicated key. They sprayed the heat sensor, blinding it. They taped over the light sensor. They entered the combination 100 million possibilities reduced to a few simple turns of a dial. They inserted the key. And then, with a quiet hydraulic hiss, the 3-ton steel door swung open. They were in. Before them lay a treasure trove beyond imagination. The vault contained 160 safe deposit boxes, holding the fortunes of Antwerp's diamond elite. They had brought their own custom-made tool, a powerful gear puller, to systematically break open each box's lock. For hours, they worked in the cold, silent vault, their only light the small beams from their headlamps. They moved with methodical calm, emptying box after box, filling their duffel bags with a glittering river of loose diamonds, precious gems, gold, silver, and bearer bonds. They knew they could not get to all of the boxes, so they targeted the ones they believed held the most value. They worked through the night, a silent, disciplined team dismantling the wealth of an entire industry. Before they left, they executed a final, clever act of misdirection. They took the videotapes from the building's internal security cameras. But they didn't just steal them. They replaced them with new tapes, recording harmless footage of an empty corridor to delay the discovery of the crime. They then gathered their tools and their loot, walked out of the vault, and locked the massive door behind them. They had been inside for hours, and no alarm had sounded. They slipped out of the building as easily as they had entered. They were ghosts. They had committed the perfect crime. The haul was estimated to be well over $100 million, perhaps much more. It was and remains the largest diamond heist in history. The crime was not discovered until Monday morning, when merchants arrived to access their boxes and found the vault plundered. The city was stunned. The world was captivated. How could the impossible have happened? The police were faced with a crime scene that yielded almost no clues. The thieves had left nothing behind. No fingerprints, no DNA, no tools. It was a perfect, clean job, except for one small, almost comical mistake. One act of inexplicable carelessness that unraveled the entire masterpiece. Leonardo Notarbartolo, the meticulous mastermind, the man who had planned for every contingency for 3 years, made a blunder that a common purse snatcher would avoid. After the heist, the team split up. Notarbartolo was tasked with disposing of the evidence, the tools, the plans. The general refused from the operation. He was supposed to burn it all. But for reasons he has never adequately explained, perhaps out of sheer exhaustion or hubris, he didn't. He drove into a forest just outside Brussels and simply dumped a garbage bag into a ditch. A few days later, the owner of the property, a self-described hermit, stumbled upon the discarded bag while walking his dog. Annoyed by the littering, he opened it, intending to find an address to complain. Inside, he found a bizarre collection of items: videotapes, empty diamond pouches, security invoices from the Antwerp Diamond Center, and, most damningly, a half-eaten salami sandwich. The police were called. The sandwich provided the DNA of Leonardo Notarbartolo. The invoices bore his name and address. The perfect crime was undone by a piece of garbage. Notarbartolo was arrested a few days later at his apartment in Antwerp. The other members of the School of Turin vanished, and to this day, most have never been definitively identified or apprehended. At his trial, Notarbartolo was defiant. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He served 6 and was released on parole. But the story does not end there. From prison, and after his release, Notarbartolo began to spin a new, even more elaborate tale. He claimed that the official story was a lie. He alleged that the heist was actually commissioned by a Jewish diamond merchant as part of a massive insurance fraud scheme. He claimed that they had only stolen from about 20 of the boxes, not the 123 the authorities claimed, and that the total value was closer to $20 million, not over $100 million. He insisted that many of the merchants had emptied their own boxes beforehand and then claimed their contents were stolen to collect the insurance money. He even claimed that the vault door was left open for them and the combination was a gift from his shadowy employer. Is he telling the truth? Or is he a master manipulator? A storyteller trying to minimize his crime and cast blame on his victims? The truth remains as elusive as the diamonds themselves. Of the massive haul, only a tiny fraction has ever been recovered. The rest, a king's ransom in stolen light, dissolved back into the criminal underworld, recut, resold, and scattered to the four corners of the earth. The Antwerp heist remains the pinnacle of its craft, a crime that was both a technical marvel and a human folly. It is a story that proves that even the most impenetrable fortress is only as strong as the people who guard it, and that the most brilliant plan can be undone by a moment of simple human stupidity. From a stolen smile in Paris to a ransacked vault of diamonds in Antwerp, the art of the heist is a story of audacity. It is about a desire not just for wealth, but for legacy. The thieves we have spoken of tonight sought to possess the priceless, to outwit the infallible, to become legends. But their stories are also about absence. They leave behind empty frames, scarred canvases, and plundered safes voids that remind us of the profound fragility of the treasures we create and hold dear. For every masterpiece stolen, a piece of our shared human story is lost in the shadows. Sleep well, and may your dreams be untroubled. Good night.